So this is an introduction to calculating the SEV when we don't have bare land. In other words, up until now we've been assuming that at time zero we had age zero trees, and we calculated the value of the land under that scenario. But it's usually the case that if you're looking at valuing land that it's not bare land. And in this case, I'm looking at a timeline where the way we're going to manage the forest on this land is spend 517.02 today, get an income of 368 in year 12, get an income of 713 in year 18, and get an income of 3454 at age 28. So if this was a bare land case, in other words, we were starting at time zero, we'd calculate SEV the way we've been doing it, which is bring all of these benefits back to the present. So this would be discounted 12, this 18, this 28. If you add those discounted values together, including the 517 at 4%, you'd get an NPV of 1216. If you plug that into Formula 4, you get an SEV of 1825. Now, we're going to assume we're going to come into the stand when it's 6 years old. So we want the SEV of a 6-year-old stand. So SEV means we're going to infinity. So we're at this point on the timeline, and we want the present value of this land managed under this rotation to infinity. So basically what we have is the first rotation isn't a complete rotation. But after we get to year 28, that final harvest takes us back to bare land, and the normal SEV procedure would kick in. So that's marked in green here. So at age 28, we would harvest and get 3454. We would start the next rotation by spending 517. 12 years from that, we would get the plus 368. So it turns out that calculating that bare land SEV is part of what we need, because at this point in time, this complete cycle starts and is repeated to infinity. So this 1825 is valid for taking care of everything from this year 28, which is 22 years from now, so age 28, to infinity. So the timeline we're looking at starting at age 6 is we're 6 years from this 368, so we'd bring this 368 back 6 years to here. We would be 12 years from the 713, so we discount this 713 back 12 years to year 6. We're 22 years from getting the final harvest for this first rotation, so we'll bring that back 22 years to here at 4%. And we're also 22 years from the SEV for continuing the full rotation to infinity kicking in. So we could then bring back this 1825, which represents the present value of all future rotations at this point in time. So we could just discount that at 1825 back 22 years, just as if it was a single payment. And if we added all of those together, that would be the SEV associated with this 6-year-old stand. So let's see what that looks like in Excel. This is the example that's on the website. And what I've done here is I've set up the same timeline. In other words, this is the 28-year-old timeline. There's our minus 517 net income, plus 368, plus 713, plus 3454. And I've gone ahead and calculated the bare land value as we described on the timeline. So this 1217 is adding up all of these present values, and we plug that into Formula 4 up here, and we have a SEV of 1825 for bare land value. But in this case, we're starting at time 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend like we're at this point on the timeline. What that means is the trees are 6 years old, but this is time 0 on our timeline. So what I've done is over in this extra column here F, I'm going to discount all the income we have in the future back to where we were on the timeline, right? So if you look at the formula I've written here, I say, okay, I want the present value of the income in this year discounted back to C10 minus 6 because we're at age 6. So if I subtract 6 from 6, I'm at timeline 0, and that's what we need to discount it. Right? And when I drag this formula down, it's locked in on pointing at the interest rate. It's pointing at whatever net income we have in column D. So let's look. The next net income we have is 368, 6 years from now, which is age 12 income. So this 290 is 368 D16 discounted by 1 plus the interest rate, 0.04, raised to the C16 minus 6, which is 12 minus 6, which is where we are on the timeline. So just by copying that formula down to here, I've discounted all of the income from this rotation back to 0. So summing F10 to F32, so just summing these income streams, we've got 2193. Well, you can see that's a lot higher than our NPV from bare land, and that makes sense because we avoided this cost. That cost is 6 years behind us, and we're 6 years closer to all of the income. So those two things together make the NPV at age 6 higher than the bare land NPV. Now what we need to do is to take into account all future income. If we just plug this NPV into the SEV formula, it would be incorrect because that would essentially be repeating to infinity a rotation that starts with age 6 trees. So what does get repeated at the end of this rotation, age 28, is the bare land SEV gets repeated, which is this number here. Right? It's calculated up here from the bare land numbers. I've copied it down here. This cell just copies whatever's in that cell. And what I've done is I've treated it like a age 28 income, just like 3454, because it's coming at the end of the timeline at the same time that that's coming in. The cell over here is really just dragging the same formula down all the way to an extra line, which means that 770 is 1825 brought back. C33 minus 6, C33 is 28, minus 6 is 22. So both of these are brought back 22 years because there's 28 sitting there. And so the SEV is the income from the rest of this first rotation plus the discounted value of all future rotations. And so this formula here is really just summing up all of this income. So that's the SEV from age 6 for everything that happens in the future, which is the rest of this rotation and the discounted value of all future rotations. The second tab has calculations for all of the different ages. You can see 2963 is what that says for age 6, which agrees with our calculation. So hopefully this helps you get on track with a mid-rotation SEV.